Mr. B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, September 7th, 2018. It's official. Twitter has announced that Alex Jones and InfoWars have been permanently banned from the Twitter site. And my first reaction is to cite the words credited to German pastor Martin Niemöller back in the 1950s. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And that's where we are today. As you probably know, I'm not a fan of Alex Jones' work. I don't visit InfoWars. I don't find his work to be interesting or compelling, even when he covers some of the same topics with similar angles as I do. But I deeply defend the First Amendment right of Alex Jones to speak and be heard. And we really are in a phase of fascism, where there is a politically correct consensus about what is acceptable discourse and what is not. And that is increasingly being defined by corporate and hardline extreme right-wing interests. And Alex Jones is an expendable, useful idiot from their point of view. Because even though he supports many of Trump's messaging points, well, it's useful to both Trump and to the organized political left, such as it is, to ostracize him and to take satisfaction in doing so, without recognizing the threat that we all face from the kind of arbitrary silencing of somebody like Alex Jones. And let me just make the simple and most obvious comparison. The most offensive person on Twitter on a daily basis is the President of the United States. He spreads malicious lies. He ruthlessly attacks his political opponents or people he perceives as in his way. And he uses it as a true demagogue would. And you don't hear even a whisper of any effort to create standards that Donald Trump or any other Twitter user would have to comply with to continue using the platform. And as you know, I'm still offended that my friend Peter Van Buren, who had a scurrilous exchange with Jonathan Katz and others on Twitter, an exchange that doesn't come anywhere close to the offensiveness or the disinformation of either Trump or Alex Jones. Peter Van Buren has no recourse. There is no appeal. Nobody from Twitter will talk to him. He gets form correspondence back. You would call them form letters, but they're in electronic form. And so this is a really insidious assault on free expression in this country. And we're told that they're cracking down on fake news. But along with that bathwater, we're throwing a lot of babies out who have something to say, something that somebody might want to hear. And the authoritarian nature of this crackdown and the lack of a definition of standards, of process, of appeal rights. This is a very serious setback for freedom of expression by Americans in the United States. So the report here, after weeks of equivocation, Twitter permanently suspended the accounts of InfoWars and Alex Jones. The incident that inspired Twitter to action appears to have been a series of tweets containing a 9-minute Periscope video of Jones and his camera crew confronting a CNN reporter named Oliver Darcy. And in the video, Jones lambastes Darcy as the equivalent of like the Hitler Youth and accuses him of smiling like a possum that crawled out of the rear end of a dead cow. Now, this is offensive. It's idiotic. But I'm sorry. There is no justification for banning his expression. The best thing people can do is ignore it. And if more people ignored Trump, we'd all be better off. And the argument presented by Twitter doesn't really pass any objectivity test. Today, we permanently suspended Jones and InfoWars from Twitter and Periscope based on new reports of tweets and videos posted yesterday that violate our abusive behavior policy in addition to the account's previous violations. Now, here's the laughable part. As we continue to increase transparency around our rules and enforcement actions, what is transparent about this? What's transparent about the banning of Peter Van Buren? We don't know, and Twitter doesn't have to tell us. It is in their self-interest, if they're really promoting unfettered free expression, to establish clear standards and a process. Alex Jones deserves to be able to appeal this. But, of course, he is so unpopular and he is despicable that many people can rationalize this kind of unconstitutional treatment of his rights. Well, Barack Obama, he used to have a pen and a phone. Now he's just got a voice, and he's decided to unsilence it. Today, he broke his silence as a retired president, delivering a sharp rebuke of Trump's America, attacking his successor by name for the first time, in remarks that denounced the politics of fear and resentment. Obama made a lengthy appeal to voters across the country to restore a healthy democracy and denounced the tactics employed by Trump and Republicans as an unprecedented threat to the country's future. Quote, appealing to tribe, appealing to fear, pitting one group against another, telling people that order and security would be restored if it weren't for those who don't look like us, or don't sound like us, or don't pray like we do. That is an old playbook. It's old as time, Obama said. It didn't start with Trump. He is a symptom, not the cause. He's just capitalizing on resentments that politicians have been fanning for years. When there's a vacuum in our democracy, when we don't vote, when we take our basic rights and freedoms for granted, the politics of fear and resentment and retrenchment takes hold. Well, these are nice words, and I don't really feel any need to debate the former president. He's entitled to his point of view. It doesn't change my criticisms or my praises of him as a sitting president. And I'm glad his voice has returned. I think many people want to hear it. But will he make a difference? Does rhetoric counter the kind of hate and vitriol that Trump unleashes on a regular basis at the mob rallies, like the one he had in Montana last night? He's got another one coming up in North Dakota today. And these are occurring more and more frequently as we head up to the midterm elections. And while he was en route from Montana to North Dakota on Air Force One, Trump held forth with some reporters. He called for the Justice Department to investigate the anonymous author of that op-ed published by the New York Times this week, describing the secret resistance inside the White House and what is, in effect, a bloodless coup. He also said he's considering taking legal action against the Times for publishing it. Now, this is going to create a scene in his administration where any time he enters a conference room, he's going to be wondering who the mole is. Who's anonymous in this room? Who is part of that cabal? The people who take documents off my desk to prevent me from signing them or putting them into motion. So Trump went on. We're going to take a look at what he had, what he gave, what he's talking about, also where he is right now. If the anonymous author has a high-level security clearance, the president said, and he goes into a high-level meeting concerning China or Russia or North Korea or something, I don't want him in those meetings. But you don't know who he is. And this creates a very spooky game for a guy who's already pretty spooked. Donald Trump's insecurities are obvious to everyone, including our adversaries. And I believe that at this moment in time, where it's clear that he's engaged in criminal behavior, Michael Cohen has established that. We don't need Robert Mueller to bring us anything about Russia to know that Donald Trump is a criminal. And he and Michael Cohen engaged in a cover-up. They obstructed justice. Those elements are very clear. And yet this naked emperor is seen by all, and the Republicans see no evil. They're like Sergeant Schultz on the old Hogan's Heroes show. And the Democrats are no better. They refuse to accept that they have a responsibility under the Constitution, not to their re-election prospects in November, but to the future of our country. And their failure to demand resignation or to proceed to impeachment at this point, well, it is really disgusting. And it is a new low point in political spinelessness in this country, and I've been watching the spinelessness of politicians since Nixon was in the White House. So this will be an investigation that probably doesn't go anywhere until Anonymous outs him or herself. And that could be next week. It could be years from now. It took a long time to figure out who Deep Throat was. And so Trump also said, as if he were still hosting The Apprentice, that Bob Woodward's report in the new book, Fear, that Gary Cohn, the economic advisor, took memos off Trump's desk to prevent him from signing them and putting them into activity. And so Trump, summoning his deep bully bluster, said, well, Gary Cohn, if he ever took a memo off my desk, I would have fired him in 2 seconds. He would have been fired so fast. He would have been fired within the first second that it took place. I mean, this shows the absurd, cartoonish, childish mind of this narcissistic asshole. And I just set myself up for this, but his unpaid legal advisor, who is equally narcissistic and even a bigger, well, gosh, I don't know if I can say who's the bigger asshole here, but Rudy 9/11 Giuliani has been telling reporters that even though Robert Mueller said that he will not demand an interview or testimony from Trump under oath, that he would submit written questions, Giuliani and Trump are now trying to dictate the terms of what would be covered by those questions. And when the issue was discussed about whether obstruction of justice can be discussed in the questions, Giuliani ruled it out. That's a no-go. That's not going to happen. Well, when have we seen in American criminal justice a case where a subject of an investigation or a suspect in an investigation gets to tell the prosecutor where they can and can't go, what they can or cannot ask? And Giuliani is even trying to set up the limits to the ritual here. He said, well, they can submit questions in written form, and if you want follow-up on our answers, justify it. Show us why you didn't get there the first time. The arrogance here is indescribable. And Trump is adding even more threats about tariffs to China. And this gets a little dizzying because, it's mostly a set of threats. As far as I know, we have imposed only about $50 billion worth of tariffs on Chinese industrial imports. Those went into effect in July. The rest of it is on the table. It is a pile of threats. And Trump said, well, we've taxed them $50 billion. Now we've added another $200 billion. That's allegedly in the last few days. And I've got another $267 billion ready to go on short notice if I want. Well, that would add up to more than the actual amount of imports from China last year, which was $505 billion, and the total threats add up to $517 billion. And, of course, that is completely irrational. It's not justifiable, and the Chinese will continue to laugh and dodge the issue. Today is the final day of the congressional Supreme Court confirmation theater. The U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee is wrapping up the hearings with Brett Kavanaugh. Today they trot out a bunch of witnesses, some opposed, some in favor, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But it's fair to say that the Democrats put on a lot of drama. They used every available tool to try to bruise, if not kill, this nomination. And they ended up bruising him, maybe, damaging his credibility. They did show that he has lied and dissembled on many occasions, mostly about his history with the George W. Bush administration. And to me, Paul Krugman is mostly irrelevant, especially after he went so deep for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and I think really lost his objectivity. But he makes an interesting comparison. He says the attempt to jam Brett Kavanaugh onto the Supreme Court closely resembles the way Republicans passed a tax cut last year. Once again, we see a rushed, nakedly partisan process with Republican leaders withholding much of the information that's supposed to go into congressional deliberations. Once again, the outcome is all too likely to rest on pure tribalism. Unless some Republicans develop a very late case of conscience, they will vote along party lines with the full knowledge that they're abdicating their constitutional duty to provide advice and consent. A Kavanaugh confirmation sets us up for multiple constitutional crises. And I think Krugman has it right. And we've known all week, and ever since this nomination was announced, that there are at least 3 Democrats who will vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. And last night, I watched Rachel Maddow's show from beginning to end, and she created the illusion that the Democrats are all unified, and that if Lisa Murkowski or Susan Collins, the moderate Republicans who are pro-choice and who have a few other differences with Trump and Kavanaugh, if they develop a spine and decide to vote against this guy, his nomination will die. But Rachel Maddow didn't have the decency to share with her partisan viewers that Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Joe Donnelly of Indiana, Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, probably Doug Jones of Alabama, and as many as 4 other Democratic senators will ignore everything that Cory Booker and Kamala Harris and Dianne Feinstein and the other Democrats were able to squeeze out of Brett Kavanaugh, and they'll vote for this guy. And this is what I've been talking about all along, that because the Democrats cannot hold the unity of their caucus, that time and again Trump and the Republicans will prevail. And the rest of it is just theater. Part of that theater is trotting out John Dean. As you know, I covered the Nixon attempted impeachment that led to his resignation in 1974 when I was a young talk show host in Chicago. John Dean figured prominently in that whole narrative. He was the guy who said, "Mr. President, there is a cancer on your presidency." And he's testifying today, saying that the confirmation of Kavanaugh will lead to the most pro-presidential power Supreme Court in the modern era. Quote, "With Kavanaugh on the court, we should anticipate a majority that will find it increasingly difficult to discover any presidential actions which they do not approve of. There is much to fear from an unchecked president who is inclined to abuse his powers. That is a fact I can attest to from personal experience." Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like the ever-reliable Paul Elsesser. On the 1st of every month, he puts a check in the mail to my P.O. Box. And people like Kevin Beckley, Siri Walgren, Janet Steele, they each kick in $5 a month. You know, it's the cost of a hipster cup of coffee. And I mention that to see if I can get you to come on over and take out your own subscription at peterbcollins.com. Click on menu, then click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page where you've got the options laid out right there. $5, $10, $20 a month, the $50 annual subscription. And if you take out a new annual with a mailing address in the continental U.S., I've got a copy of John Dist's hot new rock and roll CD called American University, and I'd love to send you a copy. And I also heard from Jason Spitzer. He's bailing on PayPal, shifting to an annual subscription and mailing in a check. And if you want to know the address, my P.O. Box is number 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. That's Box 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Now, I didn't know this until it was over, but there was a secret set of negotiations going on, apparently for the last few months, between leaders of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and their Republican counterparts. They were trying to hammer out an agreement, a truce, over using hacked materials in campaigns. And this is a reaction to the alleged Russian meddling in 2016, the hacking that led to the exposure of John Podesta's emails, DNC emails. And they certainly did divide the Democratic Party after it exposed the chicanery of Hillary Clinton and her allies. So the truce is broken down. The Republicans say, well, we don't need this because we weren't going to do anything like that anyway. Only it's already happening. Ted Cruz and his buddies in Texas are playing dirty tricks on Beto O'Rourke. Yesterday, a message surfaced, allegedly, from the O'Rourke campaign. Quote, "We are in search of volunteers to help transport undocumented immigrants to polling booths so that they'll be able to vote. Would you be able to support this grassroots effort?" A second message, allegedly sent by a volunteer named Patsy, claimed the campaign was conducting an internal poll and asked recipients for their opinions on the dangers of socialism. So, Republicans don't need a truce? No, they just need ethical standards. And I don't think that we're going to see that anytime soon. Gareth Porter has a great think piece published today at consortiumnews.com, revealing that both the Center for American Progress, which was the shadow agency for the Clinton campaign, John Podesta was the founder there, and by the way, in the interest of full disclosure, I was a supporter of the Center for American Progress back during the Bush administration, used their radio studio, talked to many of their fellows on a regular basis, and it was a great source of critical information of the Bush side. Well, CAP has morphed into a Democratic Party establishment agency, and they teamed up with their Republican equivalent, the American Enterprise Institute, and they published a joint paper on May 10th dealing with the ugly populism that has sprouted on the Bernie Sanders left and on the Donald Trump right, which includes deep suspicion of America's overseas military actions, alarm about the rise of a surveillance state, mistrust of major institutions, and suspicion of global elites. Anyway, what's most interesting is that the establishment institutions are colluding in an effort to come up with a strategy to deal with the restive activists on their respective wings. And I think you'll find this an interesting piece. Porter also allows Jill Stein to defend herself against a lot of unfair criticism and misplaced commentary about her positions related to Russia and Ukraine. And speaking of Russia, Putin, Turkish leader Erdogan, and Iranian leader Hassan Rouhani met in Tehran yesterday to discuss what is described as the final front in the Syrian war. That is to take back Idlib from the rebel forces. And the discussion called for, actually what happened was that Putin declined to agree to a truce, and it's clear that an all-out assault on Idlib is going to happen in the next few days or in the coming days. And once again, the U.S. appears to be irrelevant to these discussions. But Trump is going to try to insert himself into relevancy at the upcoming UN General Assembly, where we are told to prepare ourselves because Trump may take the gavel and do the rare move of chairing a meeting of the UN Security Council, which we're told will focus on Iran. And, of course, Trump will defend his decision to unilaterally breach the multi-party agreement with Iran over its nuclear future. And this should be quite a shit show. Again, I mentioned that given the current domestic situation, the entire world knows that Trump is an idiot and that the people who work for him openly defy him on certain issues. This is ripe for exploitation. We are vulnerable. And to imagine that Trump, in this climate, is going to the UN to grandstand about Iran, oh, it makes me cringe, and cringe again. Dulles International Airport in Washington unveiled a new facial recognition system today. And in the future, instead of pulling out your passport or a boarding pass, when you approach the gate, you will have your face scanned by an iPad. That image will be matched with a collection of photos that are maintained in the government's database. And when they match, you'll be allowed on the plane, and if they don't, I guess they pull you aside. Now, this is for our convenience, efficiency, and security. Don't you feel good about this? Big Brother always has your best interests at heart. Now, presently, passengers still have to have their passports checked before they have their faces scanned, but they say in the future the face scan may be all that is needed. Now, I, of course, find this chilling and another intrusion into our privacy. I've spoken in the past about arriving from an international flight at a U.S. airport where they offer you the chance to have a new picture taken. They say it'll speed your processing through the customs check. But I know they're adding a fresh picture of yours truly to their growing database. And I avoid those opportunities wherever I can. I also continue to opt out of the body scanners at the airport because it's the only choice we have. We're told that we can opt out of the facial recognition system for now. But I would expect that to change. The New York Times has two stories on page A9 of the Friday, September 7th print edition. The first one relates to the alleged Russian agents who went to Britain to poison Sergei Skripal in Salisbury on March the 4th. And it is written properly. I want to note the language here, where they use appropriate language to describe what are allegations and what is considered to be fact. Quote, British officials contend that the two men used a powerful agent known as Novichok on March 4th in an effort to assassinate Sergei Skripal, a former Russian intelligence officer, and they charged the men with attempted murder and other offenses. Then they quote Prime Minister Theresa May, saying that the men were believed to have been working for the Russian military intelligence, GRU. Now, this is appropriate journalism, because it tells the reader what is fact and what is speculation. But the article right below it, which reveals for the first time that Sergei Skripal was not in fact a retired double agent, but he had been doing spying assignments for Spain and perhaps other countries as well, including the Czech Republic and Estonia. This changes the dimensions dramatically. Now, does it exonerate Russia? No, it does not. And they have revealed more information, at least on these two suspects, that certainly advances the case. But they don't have facial recognition yet on the Russian suspects who are believed to be using false identities. And so this is another case that is heavily managed, where the information is dribbling out under the control of the British government. And if we'd known since March that Sergei Skripal is not a retired spy, but an active spook, I think it would have changed the context quite a bit. A couple of other spy notes. The Guardian is reporting that British detectives are further investigating the death of a Russian exile His name is Nikolai Glushkov. He was a friend of the late oligarch Boris Berezovsky, a prominent Kremlin critic, and he was found dead at his home in southwest London this past March. But well before that, there is an episode that occurred where in 2013 he went to Bristol, England, where two men offered to buy him a bottle of champagne. And he said okay, and then he believes he was poisoned in that encounter. This is being used to resurrect some of the other questionable cases, including the death of, is it Litvinenko? I have trouble with his name. But there are other questionable deaths of Russian exiles and others in England, but we don't have conclusive evidence about who is responsible. Also on Spy versus Spy, France is accusing Russia of sending one of its satellites up there in space to get close to a French satellite, which is called Athena Fidus, jointly operated by France and Italy, and that it was approached closely, too closely, by Russia's Luke Olymp satellite, which is known for its advanced listening capacity. It got so close that we might have imagined it was trying to intercept our communications. So there's a lot of activity going on in the spook world, and we only get to see this much of it. So please, keep that in mind and be skeptical when you are fed information by or about spies. And finally today, the leading presidential candidate in Brazil's upcoming primary, his name is Jair Bolsonaro. He's described as a populist who is tough on crime, wants to crack down on the corruption in Brazil, and that's what makes him popular. Well, he was visiting a town in the state of Minas Gerais in southeastern Brazil when a person lunged toward him and jabbed a knife into his abdomen. He is expected to survive, but he lost a lot of blood and will be hospitalized for at least a week. That's the latest that I have time to fit into my daily news and comment podcast here. You are authorized to share it with absolutely everyone, and you'll find this podcast every day on YouTube for your convenient access. I remain your humble host, Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.